get underway for today. Again, last reminder before I just continue to speak in English, for our colleagues who would prefer to listen in French, there is interpretation available. Il y a interprétation en français disponible. Donc, s'il vous plaît, l'utilisez si c'est votre préférence ou si vous voulez pour écouter en français. So just as always, just a quick regular reminder that we are recording this call. And within about 2 business days, we place it on the GFAN website. We'll share the link for you with any other additional resources that are provided here during the call. So thank you, everyone. So today on our call, if we can just put up the next slide, we have just an overview of sort of a replenishment update and sort of some of the latest developments in the US and around the UNGA, which is taking place this week. Looks like it's been a fairly fast and furious week for colleagues who are in New York and others watching from around the world. So first we will start with colleagues from the UK and South Africa to talk about some of the opportunities about engaging as civil society with the co-host governments ahead of the planned G20 pledging moment at the end of November. We will talk to you a little bit about some of the work and calculations that GFAN has been doing around donors compensating for, what aren't yet real but could be potential serious US cuts to the Global Fund. And we will hear from some American colleagues, some commentary around sort of what's happening there in the US. So that's our call today. As always, please be welcome to use the chat to ask questions or make comments and try to intervene, but we will make moments to ask questions of colleagues who have joined us on our speaking today after each of them have spoken. So just note that we will make time for questions and conversation as well. So I am going to pass the floor over to our colleagues from Stop AIDS and Wacky Health first. And so Rosemary or Mike, I think I saw Mike join from Stop AIDS, and I'm just not sure about just scrolling through all of the names. I don't believe Rosemary's joined us. So Mike from Stop AIDS, can I pass it over to you first? Or Courtney, I'm not sure which one from your.
Thanks, Katie. It's going to be Kathy and I, so I can maybe hand over to Kathy first, and then we'll come in on the UK bit. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So we have a little bit of a presentation sharing a little bit of what we know and some of our plans, and happy to share more as we go on. So what we have know so far about the replenishment moment itself was that it was recently announced that it was going to be on Friday, the 21st of November at 3 p.m. in Joburg. And it will be a hybrid event where especially heads of state who are in South Africa for the G20 will be in person and others will be joining virtually. And I think the invite list is meant to be limited, and it's going to be an invite-only event. From South Africa, we've heard that President Ramaphosa has confirmed that he will be attending. And from the UK, you'll hear from Courtney that civil society is asking for the Prime Minister to attend at his level. In terms of the leading up to the replenishment moment, so right before the replenishment, right before the 21st, 18th to 20th is when we have the G20 Social Summit, and hoping to have more information about the application process for the side events in the next few days. And as we were discussing, events for that period, we have been talking about having some kind of, I'll slow down, some kind of side events that focused on the campaign update. That could be something that the GFAN family can do together. Another idea we've discussed is hosting a press conference at the end of the social summit on November 20th with some of those key messages and campaign updates. And also wanted to add that we are in talks for planning a side event with Unitaid for the social summit as well. In terms of other events in the lead up, currently at UNGA, there is a civil society and communities event today in just a couple hours where we will have Sis Linda join the panel as well. And I think World Health Summit and Sepia are some of the other items that will come into discussion. I'm sure GFAN will provide an update on the World Health Summit. For Sepia in October, we are hoping to do a side event and have submitted an application, and we'll hear about it next week. In South Africa, right before the G20, there is a rally planned with President Ramaphosa on the 15th of November, and then a festival that combines music and sports on the 15th and 16th that weekend. And we've also heard about a Global Citizen event on the 21st of November. So looking for entry points in these moments as well. Our civil society engagement in South Africa is led by the SANAC Civil Society Forum that is also leading some private sector and media engagement throughout this month of September and October. The main ask is to maintain South Africa's pledge and also show more support from South Africa to other donors more broadly. So to that end, President Ramaphosa will be speaking about the Global Fund Replenishment at an event at UNGA, I think tomorrow. That is a ministerial event. And he has signed a letter that will be shared, co-authored by UK, that will be sent to the top 7 donors of the Global Fund. And his engagement is primarily focused on outreach to other African countries to expand that list of supporting countries. In terms of what would be helpful from civil society family as a whole, we've been discussing sending, thank you letters. We've heard that they would be appreciated and helpful to send thank you letters to South African embassies in other countries, acknowledging the leadership and asking for continued momentum in these last few weeks. And I'll pass it to you, Courtney.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kathy. And yeah, from a UK side, in terms of like the civil society engagement, obviously continuing our call for the UK to, at a minimum, maintain their pledge of 1 billion, matching obviously the pledge that was made at the 7th replenishment. And as Kathy mentioned, still trying to understand and confirm UK presence at the event on the 21st of November, but very much calling for that to be at the level of the Prime Minister for that event. Our engagement in terms of the pledge and the replenishment is very much focused on the Prime Minister and the new Foreign Secretary that we have in post as of earlier this month. In terms of taking that forward, very much engaging at like a parliamentary level. So our 2 organisations, in collaboration with SANAC Civil Society Forum, recently co-hosted an MP exchange programme with South African and UK parliamentarians. So UK parliamentarians visiting South Africa in July, and the South African delegation visiting London just a few weeks ago, and a programme of parliamentary events, engagement of high commissions, clinic visits in both South Africa and the UK. And then our broader parliamentary engagement also focusing on the party conferences that are taking place across the different political parties over these few weeks. In terms of engaging the Prime Minister, we're also focusing on the links between the global and the domestic HIV responses. Domestic HIV response very much a priority here in the UK. Our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, became the first Prime Minister earlier this year to publicly take a HIV test. So working with both global domestic HIV organisations collaboratively in terms of outreach to the Prime Minister, and a workshop actually that we're hosting very soon this afternoon. And just on the Foreign Secretary, as I said, Yvette Cooper was appointed earlier this month. So that's a new relationship for many of us. She's primarily been very UK focused in her role. So again, doing a lot of the outreach that we've previously done around raising the importance of global health multilateralism, and a successful replenishment co-hosted by the UK this year. In terms of the UK's engagement, more broadly in terms of the replenishment, we understand UK is very much engaged in Gulf states, Indonesia, China, India, and the private sector as part of their outreach. In addition to what Kathy mentioned in terms of the joint letters between the UK and South Africa. And again, the kind of similar kind of key events are raised here in the UK as a priority around UNGA this week. And I hope to get an update tomorrow from FCDO on that, and then to understand a little bit more around their engagement and their plans with the World Health Summit as well. Going forwards, I think one of the main things that's most helpful, and I think there's a couple of things already underway with colleagues, is just around the UK hearing from governments, communities, civil society in countries where Global Fund programmes are being implemented. There was very much a focus from the previous Foreign Secretary around, the new approach to development from the UK and the importance of that being around partnership, and which obviously aligns very nicely with the co-hosting arrangements this year, but very much wanting to prioritise the voices of those most impacted by the funding that we're talking about for the Global Fund. There's a few pieces that are underway that we're working with GFAN Asia Pacific, GFAN Africa and GFAN On in terms of a civil society community letter, and also mobilising parliamentary networks globally as well to do that sort of outreach to the Prime Minister as well. And I will stop there. Thanks.
Thank you both very much. This really helpful review of information and sort of where the outlook looks at the moment. I would like to open it up for any sort of Q&A from colleagues. So if you do have any questions, if you could please use the hand raise function, or you can note in the chat that you have a question, or if you need to, you can ask your question there. So I'll just pause for a second to see if there are any questions from colleagues. Did I see somebody trying to unmute themselves? Kana, perhaps? Maybe not.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
No questions. Okay. Okay, well, thank you all. I think that's really helpful. I think, just as I don't have any questions because I've had the benefit of getting some of this information before this morning and hearing from you all. But I do see there's one question popping up in the chat if you guys could have a look. But I think if you can, if we can ask you all to just use the GFAN listserv over the coming weeks and months before replenishment to provide, updates, but also share some of those letters that are being sent out, or, when you need sort of more sort of amplification of your specific asks, whether it be with parliamentarians or, of civil society colleagues from implementing countries. I think that would be sort of very helpful. There's a question about sort of high level representation in terms of that replenishment event that's taking place just before the G20. So if there is, okay, it'd hopefully be the Foreign Secretary. Mike, did you want to speak any more to that, or is that about as much information as you've got at the moment?
Just as maybe a bit of context, as you may all be aware, if you're following at all sort of UK politics, then things are very challenging for the government at the moment, and particularly the Prime Minister. There's sort of chats around potential replacement, etc. That none of that is in progress yet. But what that means for sort of looking forward over the next few months is that the Prime Minister will very likely be very, very focused on UK domestic. And what that means is that he may roll back sort of engagement in international fora. Hence, that's probably the main possibility of him not coming. But so, yeah, we're obviously really pushing and hoping that he will come to that crucial event. But just a bit of context.
Thanks, Mike. That's helpful. Any other questions from colleagues? Just have a quick look here. No, I don't think so, but hopefully you have an event coming up shortly, so that hopefully some of you are able to stay online, colleagues from Stop AIDS and from Wacky Health. So if there are any other questions, keep an eye on the chat. I'm sure we can get answers for colleagues if they come to you in a little bit. So I am going to pass it back to my colleague Conte now, but essentially what we wanted to talk to you all about is a little bit of work that we've been doing to kind of crunch the numbers a little. And that's a very good title for the slide, Finding Some Reasons for Hope. It is a very difficult time, and there have been some new pledges this week, and there have been some pledges over the last, couple of months, really. And so far, they are sort of a keeping up to more or less up to what was, what happened in the seventh replenishment, but with some of the sort of threats to the broader ecosystem and some of the, threats to some of the bigger Global Fund pledges, we thought it was important to sort of crunch the numbers and talk a little bit about, where there could be hope and what it would take to get us to, to better scenarios than maybe we're currently expecting. Because while it may be difficult in different countries to advocate for some of these things, it's important to be noting and stating what is possible if donors do step up. So, Conte, I'm going to pass it over to you to go through the sort of perspective that we've taken with this and share the sort of products that we have for you all to review and understand these. Over to you, Conte. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Katie, and I apologize if I sound slightly like I have a cold, because I have a cold. Some of the things we wanted to do with these various pieces of work was, we have an idea of the US has indicated its intentions to cut their contribution to the Global Fund. These declaration of intentions contained in the White House budget for 2026 are not definitive. They are likely to change. In the past, they usually have. And so this is not to say that we know what is going to happen on that side, but we're still interested to understand what sort of implications this level of cuts would have, and in particular what that would mean for other donors if they wanted to fill the gap. So what is in the White House budget is to cut the US contribution to 2.4 billion. There's a lot other things in there, but for our purposes here, that's what is important. So that would be roughly halving the US contribution from current level, a bit less than that. This is additional to all the cuts to USAID, including PMI and to PEPFAR, just to be clear. And so we wanted to get a sense of what was the size of the hole that would leave in the Global Fund budget. And so you can read in detail the calculations that we've made, and we used a very handy tool for that is available on our website, and I'm putting a link to sort of a long version of what we've done. But essentially, if we were in 2022 and the US was cutting the contribution by more or less by half, that would leave a hole of about 2.1 billion in the Global Fund budget. We estimate using the Global Fund tools to estimate the impact of funding, that corresponds to about 1.3 million fewer lives that could be saved during GCA. So it's obviously extremely concerning, but we wanted to get a sense of what it would take for other donors to make up for the difference. And one element in particular is that since 2022, something has happened to currency markets, and a dollar is worth significantly less compared to other currencies than it was 3 years ago. And that means that to fill that hole, we need other donors to step up, but to step up by significantly less than it would have been the case even just a year ago. So these are the calculations that this is what we found with our calculations, is that to essentially get back to the current level of funding for the next grant cycle, and that's based on a number of assumptions in terms of what happens to OPEX, what happens to catalytic investment, etc. But to give you a rough idea, at a 10% increase by all other donors, assuming that foreign exchange maintains, is enough to make sure that country allocation stays stable for the next cycle. If we have a 15% increase, and again, foreign exchange remains the same, we have a slight increase in country allocation, and maintain the catalytic investment can remain at the same level. And so that's because the reason why we don't need that big of a step up is, again, because the euro and the pound in particular are a lot stronger against the dollar than they were in 2022. And so another way to phrase this is that if all of the donors increase their contributions by 15%, we can save 1.3 million lives extra, because we can fill the gap that could be left by the US. So we wrote a brief on the question that I'm sharing the link in the chat. But the key idea we want you to leave with is that there is a major funding crisis in global health, and cuts to the global fund that would come on top of cuts to a number of bilateral aid channels would be a further gut punch. But as far as the global fund is concerned, the US is one of many funders, and others very much have the option to step up, and the level of effort that would be required from them to at least maintain our level of funding is very much doable. We're talking again about a 10 to 15% increase across the board, which is less than the increase between the 6th and the 7th replenishment. And with this, the floor is back to you, Katie.
Thanks, Quentin. So we know it's just, an easy ask at this time in many of your countries. So we're sure that, everybody will be, changing all of their communications for the next few months. But we do recognize that it is difficult, but it is important to be setting out, what would be possible in terms of being able to maintain the actual level of investment as opposed to what would be possible with maintenance or slightly below maintenance pledges from colleagues. So we do open it up for colleagues to ask questions. And Delphine, I mean, your question in terms of the feasibility of that, our sense of the feasibility of that is that it's probably slim to none at this stage, but with fewer governments pledging far in advance of the replenishment than we had perhaps thought before. There were some larger pledges that had been potential or expected before now. We still thought it was useful to put this out there as a tool for advocates, assuming that many are still engaging in conversations with their governments where the conversation is about, landing on a final number. And while, sometimes in those internal discussions, we do have to, understand the implications and the rationale and the reasons why governments make the decisions that they do. It's still important for them to understand the consequences of the decisions that they're making in real terms. And that's essentially what we're trying to provide here, because it has been very difficult this year to understand, what the world looks like in the context of the various different waves of changes that have happened, both with US cuts, but also with other countries announcing foreign aid cuts and starting to implement those that had been announced. So again, this is a tool for that. No one donor could have ever stepped in and replaced the US and the impact that it has had, for example, or the impact of the French and, with the cuts that are expected and, sort of underway there, same in the UK, et cetera, et cetera. But this is to say it wasn't ever going to be that everybody needed to double their commitments to the Global Fund to make up the difference. It was that it was a 10 to 15% kind of ask that would have made up for what we currently know in terms of the US possibility of a cut. So that's the framing of the piece. So, we invite you to think about when and where this could be useful, whether it's behind the scenes or in front in a different way. And of course, we're always there to help you understand the rationale further or understand the consequences within, your own country and the different dynamics that you're dealing with in your advocacy to understand what we're putting forward. So I do see two hands raised. So I will go to Robin and then Cecilia, and I will see and wait and see if there are any other questions. But please, Robin first and then Cecilia, go ahead.
Thanks, Katie, and happy belated birthday. Just wanting to say big thank you for this resource. I think it's really, really helpful. I'm looking forward to using it this week here in Canada during an advocacy week that we have going on. Do you see any risk, or what would you recommend in terms of how to use this resource if there's already an ask in your country that's more of a maintenance-like ask? Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a ton of ambition at the moment. I think we need to be going out with ambitious asks at a time of massive need, and I would like to do that. But is there any risk if there's a couple of different asks floating around in your country context?
That's a great question, Rob, and I'm going to take Cecilia's as well, and then we can come back to it and invite other colleagues who have thoughts on these questions too. Cecilia, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Happy birthday. Thank you for your leadership. So I just to add to what Robin said, I also want, maybe I have to look at the beginning, but I wish we can also celebrate US a little bit for their contribution so far, maybe not much, but something that will motivate them, because our last call, my delegation call with Germany, they are also saying that when we are asking, they want to see some celebration and other things. So I want us to take it into consideration while we develop the messages. And the messages are very helpful. And so we will really want to use it and continue the advocacy on key moments. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. So I'm going to answer from my perspective, but I am going to invite other colleagues to, jump in, including Conte, but, colleagues from outside of GFAN, because this is something that we have done because we think it is useful under certain circumstances and in certain contexts, and not necessarily, a broad-based tool that everybody can just, throw out there and assume that there's going to be no issues and it'll all land positively. But Robin, to go back to your initial question, yes, an awful lot of realities in many countries is that there is the most likelihood of a maintenance or even a slight or even a decrease, not necessarily slight, but even a decrease to pledges. But there's very few countries where civil society haven't been asking for at least as much as in the last replenishment, or slightly more, which is, I know, the case here in Canada, where the sort of formal coalition of advocates is, I think, somewhere around 12 or 13% in terms of an increase. And there are other places where an increase is still being asked as compared to GC7. And so this is meant to kind of, add some sort of value to that. Is there a risk in country context to be, having multiple asks if, for example, some advocates don't want to use something like this or an increased ask and, want to continue on maintenance? I mean, of course, there's always risks to that, but it's really country context specific and depends on sort of those relationships between and amongst CSOs. But I would always just say, each other usually fairly well, and can have those discussions either, behind the scenes, so that even if you are, facing your governments with different asks, there can be an understanding of sort of why, and sort of supporting each other and lifting each other up in your asks, while you're asking for something perhaps more ambitious, or perhaps, to be perceived less ambitious by some. So, but if anybody has any sort of advice or, recommendations on how to manage that kind of stuff, I welcome, folks to connect with Robin through the chat or to put up their hands. And it looks like Mike has put something as well. But in terms of issues to the US, I mean, of course, right? But we've all been tiptoeing around the US and what it's doing for the past year. And honestly, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm kind of tired of it. And it's time to sort of say, this is what this government and this administration is saying it intends to do. Right? They have put that into paper. And so we're taking that as a very real threat. And we are trying to give some tools to understand what the impact would be if that does come through, and how you can use some language in your countries to encourage a little bit, if not a lot, of ambition from your governments, and or supplement sort of the asks that you already have of your governments, as many civil society colleagues are asking for an increase, even though it is understood that that is far less likely perhaps than it has been in past replenishments. Contain, did you want to handle any of that before we go back for other questions? And I'm just going to catch up on the chat myself.
Yeah, a couple of things from that came up on the chat, which I think are very good comments. Just to be clear in terms of what our outlook is, we're not GFAN. Sorry. My allergy is a bit bad. GFAN never takes over from national advocates in terms of looking at asks, so that's partly why we avoid here saying that country X or country Y should come up with this or that number. It's just some guidance. What we have seen across advocates, and it's partly to answer some of Robin's comments, is that we have seen somewhat even split across major donors between ambitious pledges, meaning pledges that are ambitious asks, which are much higher than the 10-15%, or ask for maintenance. These are sort of the two options we see among advocates. So we don't, in fact, think that 10 to 15% figure differs much from what is out there in terms of ask. It's just a different way, perhaps, to frame it. Then, in terms of whether it's realistic, and looking at the current moment, honestly, I wouldn't put my money on it. Like, it's not like we're not in the. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to say what is most likely to happen or not happen, but the number of indicators are pointing towards reductions in funding for the Global Fund. Like, it's sad, but it's the reality. And even if they don't, I think part of the problem is that the Global Fund relies on other partners, and whatever money goes to the Global Fund in the context of budget cuts, when it comes to ODA, means that it's less money going to other partners. And so, like, even if it's not much of a, even if it was less of a cut for the Global Fund, if there are general cuts in ODA, we will see an impact on partnership level impact in the next funding cycle anyway. So that's, I guess, the hope isn't on that side, but it's more, what we try to push is an idea that a lot of countries are hiding behind the US to not get as much flack as they would normally get from the kind of cuts that they're projecting. And we want to swap that narrative around to really point out that it's not that difficult, in fact, to compensate for the US withdrawing. Because, again, there is a competitive advantage at the current moment, because the dollar is relatively weak, which gives other donors more money for their buck. And the other thing I will say, because there was a comment about using Gavi pledges as an indicator, I think it's not a bad idea at all. That's not the way we went in the longer piece, that the second one that I shared. We use IHME projections for ODA budgets as a guide to sort of look at what cuts across the G7 would look like. This said, the overall impact is, like, the numbers for each country are different, but the overall impact is not that different. On the impact of inflation, I think it is a bit tricky, because if we use a basic inflation index, that's like, the Global Fund doesn't buy phones. Well, we probably buy some phones somewhere, but generally it tends to buy a pharmaceutical product, and the type of pharmaceutical product that it buys, the direction of travel for these kind of prices tend to be down, because we see volume increasing, etc., etc. So I don't know where we can use generic inflation index. This said, prices have, like, whatever lowering of prices that we've seen since 2022 are probably offset, from other parts of it. So I wouldn't assume that we get more money for more impact for dollars now than we did in 2022. I wouldn't be surprised if it was about stable. And I think this is generally the sort of conversation we've had with colleagues at the Global Fund Secretariat, and this is the sort of projections that they're making as well. That's it for me.
That's it. That's all. Thanks, Conte. Again, I think, and there is Rodrigo, who's been waiting very patiently with his hand raised for some minutes, so I'm going to go to him next. But just a reminder, for us at GFAN, this very much is sort of an extension of the, how to close a funding gap report that we released in July of last year, before, all of the impact and all of the sort of different things this year that happened in waves that, we weren't necessarily expecting, around the conversation around the interplay between what happened last time, what has changed in terms of purchasing power, how inflation has been affected, et cetera. So if you are interested in sort of seeing, our longer piece and, how that threads into this one, the connection should be there for you in terms of our papers online, and we'll pop all of our links again into the chat. But I'll go to Rodrigo for a question or comment. And I did notice, I think you did post something in the chat as well. But Rodrigo, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. And I'm happy to be here in this network. We are relatively new. At least I haven't been able to attend many of the meetings. But I want to add to some of the points raised here. So The first one is to a little bit explain IDA's work and mission. So we focus on all infectious diseases. So the fact that we are advocating here for HIV is absolutely crucial to our work. However, I also have to stress that it's not only HIV, TB, and malaria that are lacking funding since US withdrawal. There are all the other diseases in a way. So I think this should be a joint voice, and that's why IDA is inviting all countries to pay more attention to infectious diseases and to bring back investment in global health. I just came from a meeting in the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I wish this conversation had been taken like a couple of hours before, because I could have also mentioned that the Nordic countries have been historically great leaders in ODAs for infectious diseases. But my concrete suggestion here is that this conversation could be taken through the Global Health Finance Coalition as well, because that is a place where we can coordinate global mobilization and advocacy work regarding health funding. So my invitation here also with you, Kate, and the other members of GFAN is to join forces. We're going to have an event at the World Health Summit, so a roundtable on global health finance. So anyone present in Berlin, feel free to register for this event. I'll share here in the chat in a little bit. And otherwise, happy to also have a conversation more in depth with the GFAN community and the leaders on how we can coordinate this work more closely.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Appreciate it. Welcome to the GFAN calls, and look forward to connecting with you. We are going to cover a little bit of what we're doing at the World Health Summit as well. So feel free to share information over the listserv or here in the chat. So thank you. Unless there's sort of further hands raised at this time, which I'm not seeing, I am seeing a good conversation going in the chat, so that's lovely and welcome. Thank you, Mark. And we did want to turn it over to give it to you, actually, Mark, for sort of a quick sort of update on sort of what's going on, but maybe you can sort of lift off of these questions. We know you're on a train, but you're actually super clear. So fingers crossed on the audio and the video working together, and we look forward to your update, Mark. Go ahead. Thanks. So close. We can still see you, but we can't hear you yet.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Excuse the train sound in the background. I think, you've captured the situation in the U.S. partly. I think the two things that to speak to or three things. There's release of past appropriations. You'll recall that the administration driven by Secretary Rubio did release $1.3 billion to the Global Fund. And now the Global Fund has sufficient match from other donors to receive another $1.25 billion. And so we are working in the advocacy community hard to try and get that released. Back to reprioritization. As I put in the chat in more detail, the House moved an appropriations bill with a solid $1.5 billion figure for the first 3 years, and did not accept the administration's proposal to move from a 33% share to a 20% share. The Senate is likely, can you hear me? The Senate is likely to have a bill with a similar level and a direct affirmation of a 33% share. So these are encouraging signs for other donors. Of course, the administration itself seems to have a will not to spend Congress's appropriations, as stated in its President's budget request, an intent to match. Wonderful. Katie, would you like me to speak to the new America First Global Health Strategy released last week?
I think it would be helpful, a quick overview, but if it may be more helpful with your audio if you turn your video off. It may not impact it, but if thanks.
I will do just that.
Despite me personally loving watching somebody on a train in North America because it's such a rare occurrence here.
Okay. Now, just the voiceless.
Yes.
Voice of the faithful. Okay. So last week, after PEPFAR and the Global Health Security and Diplomacy Bureau had reached out to friends multiple times since political leadership, the department came out with so-called America First Global Health Strategy. And it has an obvious emphasis on transition towards implementing country self-reliance.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
But pardon the background. But it emphasizes the United States staying firm on procurement of commodities and on funding frontline healthcare workers. It imagines a ramping down by having with PEPFAR countries compacts on mutual agreements of timetables of cutting funding and increased responsibility for data systems or programs and funding over time, which it hopes to negotiate by March 31st. But the strategy expresses explicit praise for the Global Fund. As I said in the chat, it's maybe for reasons that many of us in this community of solidarity, don't emphasize, but it sees the procurement, the supply chain, the commodity efficiency of the Global Fund as strong and indeed better than the contractors that the U.S. have been using bilaterally for PEPFAR and the President's Malaria Initiative. The strategy says U.S. contributions to large multilateral funds such as the Global Fund have also created new markets for U.S. products. And while we may not agree with the emphasis, it does demonstrate that they are thinking of the Global Fund as essential as the U.S. cuts bilateral funding. The strategy emphasizes that there are advantages of commodities and procurement, strong data systems, partner country co-financing policies, commitment to aid people meet malaria goals, work with the private sector and faith groups, and propelling country ownership of domestic spending. So in an odd way, despite the president threatening to have less funding and a slower match, the State Department strategy emphasizes strengths. And in the recent early September announcement of a State Department Global Fund Gilead cooperative arrangement on lenacapavir, they had also similar public statements that were very positive about the Global Fund. So anyway, that's plenty. Let me go on mute and see if there are any questions I could add in the chat box.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. And it was a little bit choppy, but it is, it is helpful to see. And I'm just about to pop in the link for colleagues to, the statement that Friends did make last week on the release of that strategy. And if there are any other sort of resources, I know Friends has been putting out a lot in the last weeks or two. So yeah, thank you. It'd be great if you could put that into the chat. But if there are sort of any questions, I do know, from my perspective, just watching from the sidelines, I have been seeing a lot of reactions where they're, where colleagues are trying to, sort of see the positive in what this is, in what this strategy is, and sort of trying to find the right messaging to kind of, uplift the positive that can be found there. And it is helpful to know, Mark, sort of some of the ways in which, the Global Fund is positioned and the work that it does within that strategy. But are there any questions or comments for Mark around sort of those quick overviews that he gave around sort of both the opportunity that's there in terms of the funding and, you know, how that plays out currently in the political situation, as well as the new global health strategy, which we can come back to at a later time. It was just, we did ask Mark to come in with some very quick reflections today, but we can come back to that on a later call as, you know, more colleagues sort of, you know, have a chance to review it and understand it and look towards the future with it past, you know, the next couple of weeks kind of thing. Are there any questions for Mark? Okay. And thanks, Mark, for popping into the chat the link to the new strategy, as well as sort of some key talking points there from your perspective. Any other US colleagues on the line wanting to share any other resources or any other thoughts at this time before we move on? Okay, not seeing it or hearing anybody. So if we could just pull our PowerPoint back up, I did just want to give a very quick overview in terms of the upcoming World Health Summit. I'm not sure if Conte or another colleague can pull that up, or if you guys want me to do it. I'm not sure who was sharing it originally, so.
Google, it's coming, it's coming.
It's coming. Katie, just be patient. Now you're in your 6th decade, and I should learn to be more patient. Okay, perfect. Now we're seeing your emails, which is also delightful. So we did just share as links in the chat, sort of our pledge tracker and replenishment tools. And so aside from the conversations that we were having earlier, we are tracking, as we typically have done, the pledges that are coming in, as well as, you know, just giving us a sense of what that means in terms of, you know, those highlight calculations around lives saved and those kinds of things. And I would just note that with the pledge tracker, we are tracking when there is a set aside. We are tracking, you know, Conte, we're still seeing your emails and your stuff. So you might want to pull down some of those other open tabs. We are on our, thank you, that's perfect. We are tracking sort of set asides on our tracker this time, so that you can see the sort of total number. And there's a link there in terms of our aptly titled Cast Aside the Set Asides brief, from the perspective that we have at GFAN, that you know, set asides are not typically, or have not been typically, and by their name, are not funding that goes to the Global Fund. They are not counted toward, they are not available funds to count towards allocation. And so, you know, we don't believe that it should be, you know, considered a part of the pledge, even though it typically is, and it's often announced at the same time as a pledge, et cetera. But that's, you know, our pledge tracker. And we also have been, colleagues have been working to put up on our pages a number, making sure that we have all of our briefs and all of those kinds of things available for you. And I believe there's also some work going on into making some of the Francophone resources that we have that are relevant to replenishment also available on the website for our Francophone colleagues. So for World Health Summit, it's, first of all, never too late to let us know that you're coming and planning to be there, so that we can bring you into the loop in terms of events and things that you may be interested in coming that we're doing, or to let us know ones that you would like other GFAN colleagues to know that you're working on. But we are planning a pre-meeting on October 11th in the sort of mid to late afternoon, and it's at a hotel that is centrally located in Berlin. Just in terms of knowing generally where it is, it's quite close to the new location for the World Health Summit, the hotel. And then over the next few days, we are also planning a number of different events, some still to be fully confirmed, including one with the private sector, building off of an interesting event that took place 2 years ago, I think it was, with the Siemens Healthineers, and a conversation with CSO colleagues about what was then a pilot project in Indonesia using AI. And so we're building upon that and hoping to have an interesting event, but still to be TBD, that one. But we are moving ahead with colleagues from UNGA in Germany and others around a high-level panel on the debt to health, celebrating both the German sort of example of using debt to health for many, many years, as well as other sort of experiences in Indonesia, et cetera, and high-level representation hopefully from the German government and maybe others. We will pull together a town hall with Peter Sands again, which for those of you who've been to the World Health Summit in the past, it's just an opportunity for, typically it's a little more informal than that might sound like, but just an opportunity for a check-in with Peter and other Global Fund Secretariat colleagues in that month or so before the big G20 pledging event, as well as a high-level panel with African scientists that we're planning, co-organizing with other colleagues from, and Conte can correct me where I'm wrong, but I believe it's REACT and Malaria No More and a few others. So this is just to give you a sense of sort of where we're at in terms of the World Health Summit, and we'll pop in the chat the link to join to indicate we have a little form to let us know if you're planning to participate at the World Health Summit in person so that we can loop you into plans for all of those different events that we're doing and hear from you in terms of some of the other events that you're seeing that are important to you. So I will go back and open this up to questions, the link to know, if you're joining the World Health Summit in Berlin. From our perspective, I don't believe, Cecilia, I see your question around being able to join virtually. The World Health Summit itself has a lot of its sessions virtual, so we can make sure that the links for that, it's clear like how you can participate, but I believe you still need to register, but we'll check in on that. But in terms of our events, I don't believe any of them, as both Conte and Peter have said, will be available for that. Most of our events currently that we are doing are outside of the World Health Summit itself, except for, I believe, the high-level panel with African scientists. But I don't believe it's a formal kind of side event at the WHS, because I believe that those are a little bit cost prohibitive for us, but they're fairly close. We have secured a location to host some of these events that's within a 5-minute walk of the location of the conference. So I saw Robin, I think, or somebody had popped in about having a question around, I believe it was the pledge tracker. So, but I'm going to open it up to everyone to raise your hands if you do have questions. But yes, Robin, you had raised a question in the chat, so please go ahead.
Yeah, and I think we answered it in the chat. So all done. Thanks, Katie.
Sorry. I don't see it, so sorry, but trying to keep up there. Perfect. Any other questions or comments around the World Health Summit, including any other key sort of global fund facing events or opportunities for colleagues? Let's see. Sorry, I'm having difficulty keeping that. Okay, I'm not seeing it. Sorry.
Is it a good time to share about the events we are hosting in the World Health Summit?
What I would welcome, just because we've only got a couple of minutes left, would go is you should be able to post directly to the listserv now, and so you can sort of share that with everyone. And if you do that, we'll sort of fold that into some of the information that we're compiling for GFANers who are going to be there. But feel free to put any any links there. But you're hosting a number of events and other colleagues as well. It would be helpful to hear from you in the chat now, but also over the listserv if there are any events that are taking place that you would like colleagues to know about.
I was just going to ask if you could share a list of the events and details via email. I think that would have been a lot easier. Thank you.
We will be doing that. We are working on sort of a GFANers guide to the World Health Summit. Oh, maybe it's even on one of these windows of Conte's that we're not seeing. So exciting. But we will be sharing that. So a little bit of a guide to different sessions, both like ours, but also other ones that we hear about through the listserv or otherwise from civil society colleagues, as well as some of the key sessions taking place at the actual World Health Summit itself. So
sorry, and moving forward into the coming months in terms of South Africa, are there any events that are going to be organized that partners could contribute to in terms of speakers, etc., for the G20?
Sorry. Yes, of course there will be. And I think that the listserv typically remains our best sort of mode of getting that information out to colleagues. And Abena, I'm not sure where you're calling from or what organization. Apologies, I'm not recognizing your voice. Or
So sorry, from MMV.
Okay, well, welcome. But yes, typically like over the listserv, over the GFAN listserv is where we invite colleagues to share detailed information about that, even though we sometimes do sort of cover that on the call. So do stay tuned. And if you weren't here at the beginning of the call, and I'll mention it again here, we do place the recordings from these calls, as well as any other resources that we have on our website. In the GFAN call section within about 2 business days after the calls have taken place. So I am going to wrap up the call here. I'm just going to ask Conte if there's anything that I have forgotten that I was meant to mention. But otherwise, please, if you are planning to be in Berlin at or around the World Health Summit, please let us know. We've just posted the link to be able to let us know that you are joining. There's also a lot of links about joining GFAN, which if you're on this call, in theory, you have done that already. But if you have not, definitely do please join, because that is a way to get access to all of the listserv messages and information sharing that colleagues have around, replenishment facing and global fund facing events, but also these bigger international fora like the World Health Summit, etc. Did I forget anything to mention, Conte?
No, you did not, I think.
So there we go. New decade, maybe new Katie, who doesn't forget as many things. One can always hope. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll see you in a couple of weeks for our regular call. We'll keep you updated with information. Please use the listserv. Let us know how everyone is doing. And yes, there were many, many birthday presents, and I had a wonderful few days with my family here in Ottawa. So thank you, everybody who did reach out. It's a beautiful, wonderful community that we have. And thank you for all remembering that in the midst of all of the craziness that you're all involved in. So have a good rest of your days. Take good care, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.